Once again, with only moments to spare here, I'm going to try and get this video out just before tip-off. I'll admit I was caught off guard by the 3 o'clock start, but I still think I can make it, but just barely. So if you're listening to this and the girls' game has happened, which is more likely, remember, I didn't know that when I did any of these things. So let's get right to it. Talk about the women's Final Four, then the men's, and then probably the biggest part is we now know exactly in our pool, whatever happens, we know who's going to take it down. I'll get to that too. So let's get going. Before putting together this round and writing up some of the write-up, I did read last year's write-up, and I complained then too about both men and women's finals being the exact final that we all thought. And when I say all, obviously I don't mean all, but I mean it was our most popular in our pool and in general most of the pools around when we had South Carolina and Iowa last year. This year, again in the women's bracket, not only did we have an incredibly chalky pool with very few, because at least last year, if you remember, we had the rise of the 3 seeds and most of the 2s fell. In fact, all the 2s fell after the sweep. This year we barely even had that. The 2 seed getting into the Final Four in Connecticut, again, because of the injury, didn't really feel like it was an upset. And then sure enough, here we are, defending champion South Carolina against the team that everyone assumed would get there in UConn. So we do have our most popular final from our pool and in general. And the Final Four kind of showed that. Now, when the most electric part of the Final Four weekends happens to be an old coach complaining a little bit, well, complimenting his team, which never happens, but then kind of complaining about March Madness in terms of the setup. And it did make a lot of sense before. I mean, last year, the women followed the men in every round. This year, they flipped it so that if you were on 3 to 4 days rest, if you played on the Monday, now you're playing on the Friday. It does change things a little bit. So in this particular case, you probably do have evidence. Now, the games, though, didn't really step up, and they weren't really the primetime games we got. Because last year, if you remember, every game was like a rivalry. This round was the one that brought us Paige against Caitlin. And we had that, even South Carolina, the game wasn't great, but because they had the undefeated narrative. And remember, even getting to that point, the Elite Eight was pretty electric. You have the rematch of Reese and Clark, and, you had USC going down, you had some of the 2s. Yeah, anyway, there was a lot of kind of fireworks. This year it's been so chalky. And because we lost the Juju versus Paige match that I think if you were like me, you were really looking forward to, it feels like we've kind of just been waiting for this final, and now it kind of has to deliver. South Carolina rolled. It wasn't a whole lot to talk about. UConn, I mean, in the press conference, one of them referred to it as essentially the near perfect game, which almost jinxes you going into the final, but it really was. I mean, the big 3 that were on the platform, and you got Paige, who was still doing Paige things and didn't score that much because, frankly, she didn't have to. You got Elmer's daughter, Azzy, who also as a senior was kind of killing it with 19 and just keeping a lot of calm and composure. If you look at the turnovers in general in this game, not many. I mean, Paige buckets was 0, and the team, I think, was only 7. But then obviously Sarah Strong is the one that kind of makes you a little bit more mad if you're not a UConn fan, because this is a freshman who's come out and now effectively done the same thing that Gino's expected every year, which is this dynasty that just keeps on rolling and fueling new players that end up being stars in the WNBA. So we've got the final we thought. And actually, if you think about it, if the game lives up to standard, then I guess it was worth it, because you've got South Carolina, which is the new guard. This would be, I think, their 3rd title in the past 4 years. And if you don't include COVID, the last 8 seasons they've won, this would be, I think, 4 total. They've got those numbers that are pretty daunting. And yet you've got UConn, which since the aughts have happened, this would be their 10th title. Now, if you count the title under this coach, that was the 99 season, 99 to 2000. So adding 1 year would make sense. This would be their 11th in kind of his run. So these really are like kind of the old guard, new guard. I guess this is the matchup we wanted. It just puts a lot of pressure on the game itself. So obviously I'm filming this and recording this before the game. I don't know what it's going to be like. So are we going to be talking about this whole tournament just being a bit bland if this is a 10, 15, 20-point game? If this ends up being an epic matchup, then we write about this and saying that this was history colliding and maybe one of the bigger matchups. So a lot of pressure for the final game for 3 o'clock on a Sunday. So let's see how they do. And after this, I was pretty much guaranteed that the madness was gone and we were just getting chalk. And then the men played. I guess I shouldn't have said just the men played, because the Florida Auburn game was actually pretty great. But again, the team that was supposed to won, and that's what kind of set me up. Now, they didn't win in a chalky manner in any way, stretch of form. I mean, they were down fairly big, obviously, and then had to make that run. And even in the second half, you forget about it if you watched it, but because it didn't feel like they were down that much, but they did score 41 in the second quarter, and they were the first to 69, which is still the magic number, which I'll get to when I get to the Duke game. But realistically, if you watch this, it was all about the momentum they ran, the fact that the Tigers seemed to run out of gas in the second half, especially in the post. They committed to their no transition pushing because they didn't want the Gators to start flying. But then the Gators started flying, and then Clayton was a big job of that. I mean, perfect from the free throw line, which will come up later. Super efficient game, 34 points, even though that was kind of, deceiving. But you all know the score by now. I don't have to recap that. I think the biggest thing was just kind of that vibes of no matter what happens, it felt like destiny was just in it. And by far the most common final is Duke and Florida. Now, in our pool, whether it's Florida or Duke, because that was almost 50-50. At the beginning, I thought it would definitely, by the ones I looked at first, Florida was going to take it, but then all the Dukies showed up. It just kind of felt like that's the way it was going to go. Now, spoiler again, if you look in the background, I've obviously flown a little bit. I'm at my mom's house, and that was a long, long flight, and I was up about 50 hours in a row when the games were starting, so I was up. I actually paused the Duke-Houston game because I was literally couldn't keep my eyes open, even though I was super entertained by the game. So it was kind of funny the way I did it, because this is extremely selfish, because everything before I paused it with about 5 minutes left just had that feeling like Houston was doing everything they could, and yet you just felt this inevitability by Duke, but they weren't executing as much as you kind of maybe thought they would. And obviously Houston's got a great D. That was the big story coming into this, that no like top offense and top defense have really played like this since I think it was like Purdue and UCLA in 1969 was the stat that kept throwing out in the game live. So when I paused it and I crashed, because I just, after 50 hours, could not do anything, but I woke up and then I watched it, and it was like a totally different game. And especially, I don't need to go over the last minute. If you are watching this, you probably watched the highlights first. I don't need to recap it, except to say it was kind of that mix. You see a lot of that new offense, even with Auburn and Florida, the defense was so great. Like Florida couldn't even square up the ball. So those dribble handoffs became really key. But the fact that people are still making the same old school traditional, like the team that doesn't turn the ball over in the end, the team that hits their free throws, they seem to be winning. So it must be that, old school is not completely irrelevant, because Duke just couldn't lock it down at the end. And that was a bit of, I know we don't want to use the word in that choke sense, and I'm not even saying Proctor. The one and one, I mean, missing your first one is what it is. The foul, I know we already had, Connor was a little upset on the group chat about that one, and I get it. That's not when you always see the foul, and to be honest, it is about a 50-50 call, and you don't tend to see it at the end. We've seen that both called and not called. But in the end, if Duke made their shots, they still win the game, and they didn't, which is kind of the great part of madness. And so it wasn't until the end when finally I felt a little spark of that madness. So selfishly, even though I picked Duke to win it in my bracket, I was still happy. And that's I wrote a little bit differently about this, because I do think there's a lot to talk about, but the end of it, that is the kind of thing, like you feel bad for not feeling bad for Duke fans, because when you win, everybody hates you. And when you lose, people still hate you. And it's kind of the weird part about being a Duke fan, is you really just are on your own island. And you can put that like any of the other blue bloods. I don't feel the same way when it's UNC or Kansas. Just when Duke loses, for some reason, I'm like, yeah, that's just makes me feel better, even when I picked it. So sorry, Duke fans out there, I guess, but this is kind of the madness I needed, because if we were just going to have another chalky final, and it's not like Houston and Florida won't be a great entertainment of matchups. Sure, I think the Duke-Florida game might have been one of the highest scoring finals we ever saw, but you do forget Duke actually does have a good defense too. I still think Duke is probably the best team, but they're not going to win this year, and that's fantastic. But what does that do to our pool is probably why you're hanging on here. So going to go over it, because now we know for sure what happens if. Starting with the women, because that's the final that's about to start. I think it's pretty exciting if we look at our bracket that our 1 and our 2 have both different finals. So now we know for sure. And I think the crazy thing for those who've been in this league for a little bit, this is actually quite an epic showdown, because we have Kelly if UConn wins. And obviously we can fill in the gaps. It'd be Connor and then me as the top 3. Remember, in the women's pool, 3 get paid out. We just go by size on that one. Kelly has not won for just over a decade when she pulled a McKenna on the guys pool, but if she wins, she'd be the first one ever to be kind of the co-gendered. She'd win both the men and the women's. No one's ever obviously done that yet. If it's South Carolina, we got Lara, we got Tom, and then if we just scroll down a bit, rookie in the pool, Amari, that win a little bit of the cash. The nice thing about that, if for those who know from last year, Lara is our defending champion. She took South Carolina last year. She took her again this year. I'm sure she's already got her down next year as the winner. But if she does win, she is our first ever back-to-back winners. So this is pretty epic. We are definitely going to have a repeat champion. That's pretty exciting to me. So this game actually has a lot on the line. I mean, obviously it's for the national championship. There's a ton on the line. But I mean, even for us, kind of cool that it breaks down this way. On the guys' side, because they have the scenario generator, which still baffles me that they have not done for the women's bracket. I say this every single week and every single year. You already have the algorithm. You could do it for both. Why don't you? I don't know. Anyone who worked for Yahoo, put me in touch. The nice thing about this too, for those, again, selfishly, a Canadian is going to take down the men's bracket, and there's nothing you can do about it. And of all years for that to happen, if you notice the theme in my videos, I'm not sad about that. Ben, you took you 4 whiskeys to get there, but if Houston wins, congrats, buddy. You're taking the top spot. Plus, we do divisional because this is a bigger pool on the guys' side. So the nice thing is the top 3 are all from different continents areas right now. So we would have kind of that Euro-Asia is our number 1. Keith is currently living in the Americas, number 2. Chris Mott all the way out in Asia. So our top 3 would be also division leaders. That's a nice little bump. Going all the way down to 7th, so Jake would be the final person with everyone in between finishing in the money. If we flip to Florida, bang, we got John Strecker, which would be our Americas, Kent, who's in the Euro-African, Nikki, who's in the Asian. So again, 1, 2, 3 would get the prizes. But like I said, John not only would be another Canadian winning, which again, in this particular year is quite nice, he would be the first tri-generational, right? So this is one where his daughter and his granddaughter have won this pool. Now, normally when you say, 3 generations have done something, it's usually the oldest one that does it first. Not in our pool. We go backwards here, where John would be the first kind of grandpa whose grandchild and daughter have won this pool before. So that's pretty special. So lots to play. And obviously, sorry, I just to highlight, it would all the way down to Jared, who would win in the money, which as an Aussie, that's quite nice considering Florida's background. And Ben, unfortunately, your whiskeys would have been the ones just left out. So we'll get to that though when we get to the final. Either way, in both sides, super excited that we're going to have new people joining the hall. Also excited that it looks like really good people on the line. So really, there's a no lose, but someone's got to win this thing. Can't wait to see who it is. As I said, I'm going to scramble to be getting this one out. Here's hoping I got it by the 3 o'clock margin, but it will be just barely. I'll obviously have a lot more to talk about at the end, and I will actually catch up on all the things that I said I would. So the pool is wrapping up. We're finally onto our finals. I'll do one more wrap-up video and be in touch. But here's hoping we get at least 1 out of 2. If not, honestly, we could get 2 out of 2 decent finals, in which case, all is forgiven. Best of luck, everybody.